Good to see you here. Okay, this session, what we wanted to do here, and this is a little bit experimental, but we wanted to use the opportunity of two things coming together. One is, or maybe three things. One is, first of all, and we keep saying this in the conference, we now have human-wildlife conflict in global policy. That elevates the sort of the status of the issue. And with that, of course, then needs to come increased mobilization of resources. And so in order to actually achieve all these ambitious things that we're putting out, how can that be made possible? And alongside that, it so happens that we have a number of people from the donor community in the conference. And I thought it would be really, really interesting to actually hear from them how they see this issue, what their interests are, and throw out some ideas and get us all thinking a little bit, especially sort of the ones implementing the work, to actually hear from the partners enabling it, and just have a little bit of a dialogue back and forth on that, actually. Because that is one of the very important links of collaboration and partnership that you already have, but that could continue to grow and be scaled up in different ways. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague John Scanlon, who's going to moderate a little bit of a discussion around this. And then we'd really like everybody to also throw in your ideas and comments and questions and so on as well. John?
Great, thanks Alex, and big thank you to you, Alex, and the team for bringing us all together over the last couple of days. It's been a fantastic conference so far. Big welcome to all of you and to all of our panellists. We've got a pretty big panel here we're going to work through. We've also got some colleagues in the audience we're going to draw upon as we go through the discussion. Now, just by way of some opening remarks, as I think you've all known, there's been a pretty intense period of negotiations over the last couple of years as it relates to biodiversity, climate change, desertification, as well as many other conventions, including CITES, which I used to be associated with. But there's a common thread that runs through all of these negotiations, and that is the issue of financing. And states are no longer prepared to accept new goals, new targets, new strategies, in particular developing states, without a commensurate commitment to fund them, to resource the implementation of these commitments. And we saw that played out very much in Montreal last year, where the Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted. And those who were following the negotiations would have seen that there was a big push to create a new financial mechanism for the funding of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, that push for a new financial mechanism was not accepted, but there was a decision that the Global Environment Facility would create a new dedicated fund to implement the Global Biodiversity Framework. And I know Jaime Cavalier, is he somewhere here? Yeah, used to be with the GEF. He asked a question this morning. I don't think that fund has yet been created. It's going to be created by the Global Environment Facility, but it was a fundamental part of the negotiations to get that Global Biodiversity Framework adopted. We also saw a number of pledges to finance the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, coming from government, coming from the private sector, and coming from the philanthropic sector. That was critically important to achieving a consensus outcome. Now, we are here today talking about human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. We have Target 4, which is the one that we're focusing on. But where does Target 4 fit in the scheme of things? It's one of 23 targets. Is it going to be built into the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans? It's a question Lisa Faraway asked this morning. Of course it will. But what we want to do today is talk about how do donors view this Target 4 on human-wildlife conflict in the overall context of Global Biodiversity Framework and their investment in conservation? Do they have an appetite to invest? And if so, are they looking at it through the lens of broader biodiversity and climate change initiatives? Are they looking at this as a separate siloed area of human-wildlife conflict and coexistence that needs specific targeted funding? Are they looking at very acute situations where you have a direct conflict, a direct problem? Are they going to intersect there? Or are they looking at the more systemic challenges, the underlying causes of human-wildlife conflict? Are they going to invest there, invest over the longer term? Or where do they fit across the spectrum? Because there's probably donors fitting right across that broad spectrum. Now, at the plenary session today, an excellent plenary session, where we heard from Brian and Ganesh, Brian was talking about the need to listen if you're going to resolve conflicts. Ganesh was talking about the importance for him as a donor to listen, an enlightened donor who said he was listening to what recipients were saying, he was listening to what the community was saying. Well, this is our opportunity to listen to donors. Many of us make pitches to donors, often make a pitch to a donor, trying to seek funding, and we're convinced that our idea is the best one and is warranting funding. But this session is about us listening, us learning what is the donor perspective, where are they coming from. Now we have 5 panellists. I think the panel has grown since here. We've got 6 panellists, and we also have some people in the audience who are associated with donors who we will be calling upon. We're going to work down the line and ask them to firstly say what inspired them to come to this conference. So they're here, so something must have motivated them to come here. And also to say what's their entry point with human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. Where do they see this as fitting in their thinking? Also going to invite them to say a little bit about themselves so we know something about them. And we have 3 questions, I think, don't we, Alexandra? And let's see. It's reduced to 2, is it? Okay. There's 2 questions. These were provided to the panellists in advance, but we're not going to pose these directly to them. They're there to provide you with some sense of guidance, but you're not constrained by these questions. We want to hear your views, and then we'll be opening up to the audience for question and answer. So with that, we're going to start with Matthias and Matthias Bichelsheim. Did I get that? Okay, thanks.
More than 90%.
I was practicing with him before we started. Matthias has lost his voice a little bit, sounds very husky, but he's going to start with us. And Matthias, just a little bit about yourself, what motivated you to come here and where your entry point is for this topic.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Even with my voice? It was the rescue medics 20 years ago who helped me to a sustainable collateral damage. So that's that much about my voice. I'm with KfW, German Development Bank, for more than 25 years, largely working as a sector specialist in NRM, different regions, Africa, Latin America, evaluation department, and now in the Asian department. This is where I got connected with IUCN on our tiger habitat conservation program, which has got a fair degree of human-wildlife conflict components. So I was very glad to receive an invitation to this conference and to being quite down on the low branch of the learning curve, listening and getting a better insight and more systematic approach. So I wasn't expecting to sit on the panel when Alex asked me. I said, well, yes, okay, I can do it. But don't expect any slides from me. I'm trying to avoid HWC, which is human technology conflict, which we've experienced on various occasions here. And rather expect some Muppet Show style Stettler and Waldorf ramblings. So here we go. It's HWCC, it's as clumsy an acronym as the term is. I was thinking, well, maybe you should call it HWC or something like that. Human Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence. HWC, maybe. But I think it's crucial to ensure local support for conservation. In most cases, it's essential because that's what messes up people's relation to nature. And it's quite indiscriminate. It's not species specific like we sometimes, as institutions, tend to proceed. We'll talk about elephant, we talk about tiger, we talk about wild boar, whatever is there, maybe beavers in Germany. But it's a holistic thing, and it's essential to win over trust and support by local communities who ultimately are key to making conservation work or fail. My question is only whether Cocoa could serve as a standalone package. Most likely, my hunch is, but my understanding to be correct, maybe my imagination is not strong enough, that it will be an integral part of landscape conservation initiatives, let's call it initiatives, rather than a standalone. And we as KfW, German Development Bank, are dependent on the German government, or a financial cooperation donor. So these type of institutions tend to look for proven concepts that are scalable, that can be rolled out in larger packages, because by default we need to have certain investment volumes that can be handled, otherwise we get thrown out by management. If our ideas are nice but not big enough, you do have a problem in getting it defended. So experimenting is rather for technical assistance donors. It's a different, the laboratory kind of work. We gladly leave to others and rather look at what works, what hasn't worked. And of course, in the Huey Cocoa context, we do have maybe some generic elements, but there's also a fair amount of, let's say, specific context-bound aspects which have to be dealt with. So there's also the challenge in how to get that integrated and be flexible enough. There was talk about adaptive management on various occasions. The other question that comes to my mind, there was talk about the avoidance of implicit and explicit costs to people resulting from Huey Cocoa. So how far can we stress the argument with credible figures, robust data, so we can convince decision makers who are not as passionate to the sector as we might be, give some strong, robust data and say, well, if we do this, we do not only avoid costs, we generate welfare benefits. So some robust data and convincing arguments for planning and finance ministries for those kind of clients. Then we are also confronted, so in the Tiger program and other interventions, with increasing demands on social safeguards. I think this can be a challenge, but also an opportunity. Because if you do your social safeguard baseline properly, you have a sufficiently clear picture on whom, in which ranking, in which order priority, to provide with mitigating other measures and also avoiding elite capture and similar things which sometimes tend to occur. Another aspect is institutional sustainability. How much do we need to get things going to stand on their own feet? How much public agency involvement is required? Depends, but to my experience, it can't happen without, which sometimes NGOs tend to be a bit reluctant to team up with the respective public agencies. And I think experience has shown that if you try to do it on a standalone, sooner or later it will lead to frictions and loss of effectiveness. So that is the main thing. I hope it's not that very much, as Ganesh Ramadi has already exhaustively given an overview on donor agencies' behavioral biology. I think I'll leave it with that. Thank you very much. Just one thing from a donor's perspective, there was mention of transparency. And there's a bit of conflict from donor sides that I'm perceiving. Transparency is demanded by grantees, but donor agencies themselves tend to be sometimes skittish, volatile, opaque. So that's one plea for going for two-way transparency. Things might change, and from a donor's perspective as well as from a grantee's perspective. So I think this two-way traffic is something which should also be taken into account. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks Matthias. And we're not going to try and sum up as we go. We'll do a summary, both myself and Alexander at the end. But we want to get through all of our speakers and give them every opportunity to share their views. So we're going to next go to Megan Jeans from the Binnacle Fund. And Megan, same set of questions to you. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Jeans. I'm here representing the Binnacle Fund. I work with them in a consulting capacity, managing what is really a new portfolio of work for a broader family foundation. And it started off in 2019 with the very broad goal of wildlife conservation. And initially, it was very species-driven. And some of our initial investments were really a reflection of what are, the different species or areas that really captivated our board's interest, and we wanted to do a deeper dive. Since then, we've sort of taken a look at how our grant portfolio has evolved and what were some of the common themes emerging from the grants and the partnerships that we had. And we sort of have settled on, I would call, 3 thematic priorities that are very much a Venn diagram, not mutually exclusive at all. And foundational to all of it is human-wildlife coexistence. We're also looking at reintroduction of keystone species, as well as habitat connectivity, wildlife corridors, all of which play into some of this human-wildlife coexistence conversation that we're having today and this week. So, ultimately, I guess I'll give an example, right? So one of our, I would say, our gateway species for the work that the Binnacle Fund has done was the North Atlantic right whale. And for those of you who are familiar with this issue, North Atlantic right whales are critically endangered. They're about 350 left, of which about only 70 are reproductively mature females. So we're in a really bad situation. Gear entanglement, ship strikes are a main cause of their decline, and it's an acute issue. And there's a lot of different folks working on different types of solutions to address these main threats, and a lot of different stakeholders at the table. And so we've been able to sort of get involved closely, working with some of the fishing industry players, working with the NGOs that are trying to advance solutions like ropeless gear or whale detection systems for ship strikes. And what we've really done is sort of embraced an ecosystem, meaning a sort of stakeholder ecosystem approach, intervention, diverse intervention-based approach, so that I know there's been a lot of conversation around, competition for resources within the NGO community, understandably. And, funders can also play a role in helping to sort of mitigate that competition and bring people together to sort of build those bridges and make sure that diverse strategies and organizations are collaborating, communicating, and helping to build those bridges. So for us, that was our sort of our intro a little bit to this space, and we've expanded that to work in other species areas, other geographies, and are really interested in learning more from the field about, how people are addressing human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. What are the different, areas of need? So I'm here today to really learn and be a sponge and just hear from all of you who are experts working in this space. Some of you may have seen our recent RFP, and that for us was really an opportunity just to learn and to hear from the field, where the needs are and the different strategies folks are pursuing to address areas of human wildlife conflict, and explore how we can play a role to help support that. But ultimately, our feeling is for any of these solutions to be effective or enduring and equitable, you really have to sort of work at the community level. And there's lots of different types of interventions, be them technological or more low tech or, some of these financial instruments that folks have been talking about. And we're really interested in exploring, not just one, but what is sort of what is the diverse array of solutions that can be directed towards resolving some of these conflict issues and promote coexistence over the long term. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Megan. And we're now going to turn to Jean-Gaël Collomb, JG, as he likes to be called. Over to you.
Thank you. It's actually Gigi, but yeah, so it's pronounced in French. But that's all right. My in-laws got it wrong for about 10 years. I'm very tolerant. Just a little bit about me personally. I started about 25 years ago, probably on this side of the aisles, in the rainforest of Gabon. But I've always had a very strong interest in the interdisciplinarity aspects of conservation and looking at both social science and natural science, recognizing that the forest and the habitat was shrinking right before my eyes, and if we didn't do anything about it, then the chimps and gorillas that drew me there in the first place were going to disappear very rapidly. And so it was a point of really studying them if we weren't able to turn things around. And that belief has kind of carried throughout my whole career. I now lead a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco called the Wildlife Conservation Network. And our mission is to protect endangered animals by supporting conservationists who will ensure that wildlife and people can coexist and thrive. So coexistence is right there in our mission statement. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm here. It's really relevant to me, the notion of human-wildlife. I would call it coexistence rather than human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. Conflict is part of coexistence. It's part of what we do. And that's why I wanted to come here and get exposed to all of you, all the things that you experience. Through WCN, we have 3 core programmatic strategies. We support a core network of organizations, 22 organizations throughout the world. Several of them are here in the room. We also support a number of grantees through our wildlife funds, Elephant Crisis Fund, Lion Recovery Fund, Rhino Recovery Fund, Penguin Crisis Fund. Again, we've got several grantees of those funds in the room doing wonderful work. Human-wildlife, or in this case, human-elephant coexistence is one of the core pillars of the Elephant Crisis Fund. And then our third pillar is really to invest in what we call rising wildlife leaders, as the emerging, the next generation of conservationists through a scholarship program or investments in young professionals through a career program. And again, some of those people are in the room. And I thought it was a great place to come and meet lots of people that we have funded over the years, and that's part of the reason why I'm here, but also a great way to just learn, because it's important to just get re-inspired from all of you and also stay close to the ground. I look at the work we do through WCN. We're having 2 sets of customers. The first customers are obviously all of you, all the conservationists, listening to the needs and being very responsive to it. It's a little awkward to be sitting here and have been told that you're there to listen to us, because most of what I like to do is listen to you and then take that back and relay that over to our second set of customers who are donors. WCN is not a donor itself. We really are a representative for many individual and other institutional donors, primarily based in the United States. And we try to help conservationists connect to those donors. We provide a platform called the Wildlife Conservation Expo, where we bring a number of our partners and grantees, and they can give a presentation to potential philanthropists who are in the room, and then those people will naturally migrate towards one of the issues that are presented. We try to be as paper thin as possible. We guarantee that 100% of funds go to those conservationists. And I think that's one of the aspects that's really key, is that transparency that you're talking about, is making sure that the conservationists can really relate their stories back to the donor community and engage them and inspire them. So inspiration, I think, is a big part. But we also have to be honest and vulnerable and be able to share the failures, the challenges that we face, because I think donors get moved by that. And they ultimately give to people. They ultimately give to people that they trust are doing good work. And I think they realize that those people are fallible, like all of us. And so failure is part of this, and I think it's okay to be having those conversations and to move the needle forward. And I think I'll stop there and then take questions.
Thank you, Jige. And we'll now move to Rachel Rivera with Wild Lives Foundation. Rachel.
Hello, thanks for having me. So I get the pleasure to work with Jody Allen, who started Wild Lives Foundation back in 2016. You may know her from the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. She is the trustee and chair of Vulcan, Paul's company before he passed away. And so Jody is, she has a lot of different interests, as most people who have their own private foundation do. We support work in arts and culture. We're on the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cape Town. We support films, TV series, and we've been supporting human-wildlife conflict issues since I started with her in 2017. And we look at human-wildlife as really how do we support the community in order for the wildlife to thrive. And so if we come in, I really do believe that we have to come in at the listening level rather than the telling you what you need, because I'm not on the ground. I don't actually know. And Jody is really focused on trust-based philanthropy these days, and I think that's her new way of working. We just recently launched in actually March of last year a new fund called Daughters for Earth, and it supports women who are working on the ground to preserve and protect nature, biodiversity, to switch to renewable agriculture, and to work towards renewable energy as well. And the beauty of that project is that we get to move money to women who have historically been underfunded, underrepresented, and we get to support the women who are just killing it, and nobody's supporting them. So for us, it's really exciting. We have given out our first round of two rounds of grants, a total of 50 projects so far. And these are women that are fighting in the Amazon to protect the rainforest from logging, or women in, Emory College who are trying to rewild their campus. And so they're really, honestly, just the most inspiring women, and I feel like it's a privilege to be able to do this work. What brought me here? Well, Alex, I signed up just like the rest of you in 2019 to come, and I've been inspired by all of you so far. I mean, your work is hard, and we recognize that as funders, that this is hard work. I get the privilege to be a funder and come at it from this side of the table, which also makes me awkward because I don't like sitting on this side of the tof But I just want to applaud all of you because you guys are really doing the work that needs to be done to get us to where we want to go. I will say, one of the things I find interesting about this issue is it's really so similar all over the world. So I live in Seattle, Washington, and we deal with the wolf issue, that the ranchers and the wolves are constantly at battle with one another. And I talk to, groups in Africa, and they're constantly dealing with elephant issue. And in the long and the short of it, everybody just wants to be able to thrive in their community. And so I feel like our job as funders is to support the community in a way that enables them to thrive while biodiversity thrives. And so that's it for me. I'm happy to take questions as well, but I'll leave it to my colleague here.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And Dan Bucknell, the Executive Director of Tusk Trust, over to you.
Thank you, John, and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. It's a great privilege to be here and hear all about the work that everybody is doing. Tusk Trust was established in 1990. Our mission is to amplify the impact of African conservation. So our focus is solely on the African continent, and right from our early days, in the 90s, we invested a great deal in community-based initiatives, a number of the community conservancies that were starting up in Kenya in particular. And so throughout our history, a lot of our investment has been into supporting work that enables the local community to benefit from wildlife as well. Our original 3 pillars were protecting wildlife, supporting communities, promoting education. But in the 9 years that I've been at Tusk, I've seen how human-wildlife conflict is an increasingly growing issue for the majority of our project partners. So much so that 5 years ago, when we reviewed our strategy, we changed our themes, so much so that human-wildlife coexistence is one of our key pillars now. And in answer to one of John's earlier questions about whether we see it as a sort of a separate silo issue, well, not at all. I mean, it's one of many issues that our partners are having to tackle, along with, you know, habitat encroachment and poaching still in many areas. So why am I here? Very similar to why everyone else is here on this panel. So I'm trying to sort of think of something different to say, but no, to learn from everyone, to meet with a number of our partners who are here as well, some of whom we share with Gigi and their work, and to look for new opportunities. Before I joined Tusk, I worked in Asian elephant conservation with Elephant Family, and so I was very aware of the human-wildlife conflict issues happening there, and how they would be rapidly coming down the track in Africa. I think there's a great deal to be learned from exchange of information, and that's something that we try to encourage at Tusk, so much so that we've recently launched a collaboration fund specifically to fund exchange visits between our project partners, and to hopefully, as a next step, fund joint ventures between them. What do we look for in terms of the projects that we support? Well, it's very similar to what the other panelists have already said, transparency being key. As Gigi said as well, the honesty. We do want to know about failures and the challenges that our project partners are having. In fact, I'm always deeply suspicious if a project reports no failures and no challenges. That makes me dig a little deeper as to what's really going on. So yeah, that honesty, that transparency is key. The word of sustainability comes up a great deal, and I often wonder about this because, I mean, we at Tusk see conservation as a long-term game. I've been involved in many sort of institutional grants that may be limited to sort of 3 or 5 years, and in many cases that's not enough to really genuinely put in place some of those sustainable measures to secure impact in the long term. Of course it's important, but it's very hard to secure in the short term. It is something that we look at, but I think possibly a better term for it is more sort of durability in a way. What is their resilience likely to be if a funder, if one of their other funding sources fail? I mean, we certainly don't want to get into a position where any particular organisation is dependent and reliant on us for funding. And of course, we do look for projects that are looking at, alternative strategies for funding, alternative and innovative sources of funding. So that's very key to us. And then, like I said at the start, we've always historically invested in projects with a high level of community engagement, and of course that continues. The community really has to be, very much at the heart of the initiatives that we look to support. Thank you.
Great, thanks Dan. And now Stuart Patterson, the CEO from the Rufford Foundation.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and thanks for inviting us onto the panel. I think probably some of you might know more about the Rufford Foundation than I do, because I've only started 8 months ago, and there's been a lot to learn. My background came from the Conservation Leadership Programme, which was doing similar kind of things. It was awarding small grant funding predominantly to early career conservationists. And there's been a big sort of cultural shift in my mindset coming from working with 3 large conservation organisations to working with a small privately run foundation based in the UK and with UK-based staff. What brought me here? Well, when I was working with CLP, the Conservation Leadership Programme, we were awarding some travel grants to people who received small grant funding from us. And I think Mauro might be in the room. A few years ago, he was awarded a travel grant, said, well, going to this Human Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence conference, it sounds great. COVID hit, the travel grant got put on hold for a year and then for another year. And so that's when I first heard about this event. But it came across the bows again more recently when a grants officer we recruited, Marion Weston, who works a lot with small wildcats, said she was going to be presenting at the conference, and this lit up a lot of lights inside our organisation, and we thought, well, this is obviously a good place to be and to come and learn more about these issues. So Rufford has been supporting mainly early career grantees through the Small Grants Programme, which started, I think it was in 1999, and we're predominantly a high volume donor, and by high volume I mean we receive about 1,500 applications a year, and we try and support about 250, predominantly masters, PhD, postdoc, people who've been recently graduated, to conduct mainly species-related projects. We don't have any thematic foci, we don't focus on human-wildlife conflict, but it's something which we're very, very aware of. And obviously the issues, we're learning more about the issues, we're learning more about the strategies to help to identify some of the problems and how we can overcome them, but it's clearly not going away. And through this conference, we're learning more about how we can adapt, how we can learn, and how we can deal with them. And the main priorities of Rufford are firstly to get funding, small grants, mainly sort of £6,000, up to 15,000 at the moment, to early career researchers and conservationists, get that money on the ground fairly quickly, and provide experiential learning as the projects are being developed and delivered. Lots to learn at that time, lots of challenges, lots of successes, lots of failures, trying to learn more from those. We're going to be focusing more and doing more of the small grants work, and that's something which has challenges for us, because obviously we're making decisions fairly quickly. How do we know we're making the right decisions? We rely on the conservation community, we rely on experts to help us to identify who these people are. It also means that we're expecting some progress, but we can't expect too much within a one-year project. And what can you expect within a one-year project? Probably not very much. The project might get done, there's some experiences being learned, but is there really time to get to know about what the issues are? Is there really time to dedicate and commit to gaining trust, especially with local communities, and to understand what the key issues are? Is there time to begin to adapt to the challenges? And then the guidelines that I saw this morning will help us with that. We also want to be making sure we're adhering to that first principle of doing no harm, which again is quite difficult when we want to be taking a risk ourselves. We're providing small grants to people who don't have a track record. There is an element of risk involved, that there could be some harm done. We need to learn about that, so that's a reason for being here. And finally, it's beginning to, I mean, as a foundation, we haven't been particularly transparent. We've been quite run within our own walls, our own offices. We acknowledge that we need to be collaborating more and finding out more about what other donors are doing, how we can fit the small grants within a larger spectrum, how some of the grantees can develop their work, can begin applying for larger grants, and begin looking at sort of longitudinal studies, looking at longer term efforts, not having that sort of feast and famine that small grants normally provide. So yeah, really interested in seeing what this conversation is going to bring up with other donors here, but also hearing, more importantly, perspectives from the floor and opening ourselves up to a little bit more two-way dialogue. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Stuart, and thanks to all of our panellists for sharing their views so openly. We are going to come for a call for questions in a while, but I do want to first reach out to some other representatives of donors in the audience to draw out their perspectives. And we have with us Ruth Ganesh, trustee with the Elephant Family. If we could just get a microphone over here. Do we have any mics? Yep. Ruth, over to you.
Thanks very much. Elephant Family, I know I can hear the groan, not more elephants. We're Asian elephants, and we've been in motion for about 20 years. We've given probably about $10 to $15 million worth of grants in that time. And I am here because we are planning to diversify our remit from Asian elephants to all coexistence projects that take the community into account, if possible, have a strong indigenous angle to them and a female angle. And we are planning to do a PR job. I mean, I know people hate that phrase, but that is what we need to be doing. We need to mainstream the issue of coexistence into the West. After working with Asian elephants for 20 years, I feel like there's been a seismic change in this world. We're now trying to rewild all of the countries that have wiped out their wildlife, which is really where the money has been coming from. And I had so many dinners and so many vacuous fundraising encounters with people that want to save elephants, tigers, lions, orangutans, you name it. If it's beautiful, they want to save it. But in their own backyards, they are doing, they have got fences around their gardens and fences around their mines. And we are planning to build a herd of 100 elephants. And I think my husband showed a photograph of just a small number and migrate them across the USA, driven by women, in 2024 and 2025. And the funds that we raised through the sale of the elephants, we raised $2 million in London when we did it in 2021. We plan to put back into coexistence projects, but we also want to hold a mirror up and start the storytelling and celebrate storytelling as well as fundraising from all the parts of the world where people are making the biggest sacrifice in their back gardens. So that's the mission. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for opening up to somebody that is a little bit smaller scale than you guys. And yes, I'm here to make friends, so see you later.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks for holding up that mirror. Highly appropriate to do so, especially at a conference here that's a global conference. I just wonder, is Luigi Boitani still here from Foundation Segre? I saw him earlier, but he may not be here. Or I know Jaime Cavalier is here. Jaime used to be with the Global Environment Facility. He's now with International Conservation Caucus Foundation, but he's also experienced with philanthropic organizations. I think, Jaime, you could offer us some insights as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, John. I had the privilege to be working at the Global Environment Facility back in 2013 when the British government organized the first conference on illegal wildlife trade. At that time, it was the issue of the killing of elephants. 2 years after that, we started at the GEF, the Global Wildlife Program, that it is now sponsoring, co-sponsoring this meeting. So great to be back in the field and see how much has been done. I'm currently working for the International Caucus Foundation, which I think is probably the only conservation organization in the world that works with parliaments. We work with Congress, with parliamentarians. It started in 2006 in the United States. All members of Congress are invited, senators and members of the House, both Republicans as well as Democrats. And we just create for them an open space for them to interact and express themselves in relation to environmental issues. Incredibly successful. A third of the congressmen and congresswomen of the United States are actually members of the ICCF Conservation Caucus group. Because of the success, the founders of ICCF expanded the operation, and we're now in 20 plus countries around the world, so we can sort of give you more information of the countries of interest to you. Now that I'm on the other side of the fence, and I used to work for the Global Environment Facility, and before that for the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, here is my kind of my thought about funding for conservation. It's getting increasingly complex and complicated. It is utterly horrendous how much donors overall, I'm not referring to any of you in particular, are requesting from grantees. It's getting super, super difficult. And this is kind of a plea, if you want to make a huge difference in conservation, make it simple. Make it simple to the extent possible. I know that that's difficult with public funding, but should be easier with private funding. And I think that the reason why things are so incredibly complex and complicated was actually illustrated to me by somebody in South Africa. When they said, Jaime, do you know why you guys ask so many questions for us to get the money? I said, no, John, what is it? Not John, you. It's because you don't trust us. I think he was absolutely right. This was years ago, stuck in my head. We ask so many questions because we don't trust the grantees, really overall. And an example of how easy it could be, I had the experience at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation when it started. The applications were 1 page long. And the grantees did not have to write the application. 3 project managers at the office in Washington did it for them. We went to visit them, ensure that what we knew about them was right, and on the way back home, we actually wrote the 1 page, and at the bottom, put the amount that we were going to give them and the banking routing numbers for the office in San Francisco to wire the money. So we were actually being able to turn around, actually scoping on the field and sending money out. And sometimes we actually had to use kind of satellite dishes in the middle of San Carlos de Rio Negro in Venezuela to actually wire the money in basically 2 weeks. I know that the foundation has changed, but I think that was, for me, kind of a dream job. Because it was like, putting money in the hands of those that we knew were doing a great job. And it was very funny because they said, what else do we need to do? No, just don't do absolutely anything different. We are here because of what you do. We're just going to give you more money to do what you have to do and what you are good at. So this is just, anyway, this is after years in the donor side, now on the other side of the fence, and kind of now suffering from the complexities. And I see many people laughing and nodding, is because of some of those words actually have elements of truth. So anyway, just a very small contribution. And when I left the Jeff, I used to sign under my name, simplicity will be rewarded, complexity will be penalized.
Thanks, Jaime, and thanks for raising that. I think that resonated with everyone in the audience. You referred to trust, and Gigi, I heard you referred to trust. Rachel, you referred to trust-based philanthropy. You know, because we have seen that the things you have to do to put forward an application before you can be considered and be successful is horrendous, as Jaime said, but it wasn't always that way. So somehow we've created this very complex regime for ourselves that is taking enormous amount of effort and energy just to prepare this thing. And yet, why did we get to that space? Why isn't it the way that Jaime described, where they would go there, one page, they had trust, they invested, and they would reinvest? What's happened fundamentally to create this complexity that we're now surrounded with? Rachel, I'll come to you first and then open it up.
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I feel like I have to weigh my principal and then my partner. And I want to get your grant approved as much as you do. And so it stresses me out when she doesn't respond to an email right away, so I'm always worried. But I honestly think it's because we are so far removed from it, and if we are not participating and seeing what is happening on the ground, at least for my founder, when she goes to see a project and she meets with our partners, she's so much more inclined to want to participate and give. Like, it is night and day. When I bring her something that she doesn't know anything about, or a partner she knows doesn't know anything about, I probably have a 25% chance to get it across the goal line. Mm-hmm. And so how I try to really promote your projects is by bringing her there so she can experience it, so she can see why it's important, why she can see the value of it. Because honestly, like, it is just as hard for me as it is for you to get it across the goal line. I want to make it easier. I think the transparency, the honesty, the admit your failures. One of the things I've been grappling with, and I don't know, this is probably going to be unpopular, but is I feel like we ask our grantees to lie to us on a daily basis. We don't want to pay operational costs. I don't know why that is. We pay operational costs, but a lot of people don't. And so it's like a fight to try to keep the honesty in the room at all times. And so for me, when a grantee comes to me and says, you know, what you're asking for me is not realistic, I respect that. I will fight for you if you're honest and you're telling me that what I'm asking for isn't realistic. I will be the person that's your champion in those closed door sessions. So I don't know why we are the way we are. I think it's just historically speaking, this is how the world has worked. With our new fund, we try to make it as simple as possible. You don't have time for that. I really don't have time to review 50 projects either. And I have to trust that you guys are going to do the work that you say you're going to do. And so I'll leave it there, but I find it as frustrating as you do.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Zhizhen?
Yeah, I'll jump in and piggyback. I think there are a number of aspects. One of the things I struggle with trust and trust-based philanthropy is to what extent it can actually scale. And I think we're all just worried about all the issues that you're facing, that the world is facing, and how do we address it. And from a single organization's perspective, that scaling prospect is really daunting, because at some point, so 10 years ago when I joined WCN, we were a $4 to $5 million, make it clear, $4.5 million organization. Last year, we were a $45 million organization, and 90% of the funds go out to support program, 85% of the money comes in designated for specific projects. The volume of money that goes out the door is just much more significant. So the risks that we entail, the scrutiny that we bring from the IRS is much higher. So by default, we've had to kind of ramp up a little bit more on our partners, and many of them here might say you've had to ramp up much more than what's comfortable. And that's the feedback that I love to get, is to constantly kind of navigate that line. I know the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation is no longer a one-page proposal, for instance, but many people would really like to get back there. And the trust is really key. And so short of bringing people to the field, that's where we try to bring people together through the expos. But again, we've got space issues, so how many people can we really bring? So I would encourage more donors to collaborate, to do these things, to borrow from the model. This is what's great about to stress there are other organizations who have similar approaches. And if we could do the same thing, I think collectively we could get over this scaling challenge, because one organization alone can't do it. And you mentioned earlier something about the scarcity of funding and the competition. One thing being based maybe on the west coast of the United States and Silicon Valley is we kind of look at the world through this lens of abundance. There's plenty of money out there. It's just hard to go and unlock it. And then we've got to make the case that investing in wildlife conservation projects isn't just investing in wildlife conservation projects. It's really investing in human development, and it's that coexistence, and it's the collaboration. And so it can be a wedge that can unlock money that is actually going to schools or women empowerment or many other issues. Because when we listen to communities' needs, which is what a lot of our partners do, we really tackle so many of those issues. And we just need to explain that to donors, and that's our job, I think, is to relate that and then to bring you into those rooms and for you to just close the sale. We can sort of line it up, and then you've got to make a final pitch.
Great, thanks, Gigi. Matthias.
Just a quick one. Sometimes I tend to feel a little bit of envy towards private and philanthropic donors because I'm inclined to assume that your red tape is more of your own making than in a public agency like I'm working in. But irrespective, I think we should, this discussion should also encourage all of us to think about how to make things easier and make it faster, getting the action to the ground. So this is maybe a good opportunity, and maybe I think there might be some bright ideas out there. There's lots of people glued to this podium with their views, and maybe we can get some inspiration and ideas. Thank you.
Very good, thanks Matthias. And with that, we are going to throw out to the wider audience. You have an extraordinary panel here, all sitting. They can't run away. They're on camera. You have an opportunity to throw any question at them. Hard, tricky, whatever you like. Okay, I'm going to go right to the back of the room to start with.
Thank you very much. My name is John Kamanga. I have a question for the panel. Last year, we got a chance to participate in the IPAC conference in Kigali. And the shocking revelation that possibly about less than 5% of the funding coming from donors reaches to the point of impact. How do we release all this funding and then only 5% reaches to the point of impact?
Thank you. I think I'll grab 3 questions or so, and then we'll come to the panel. So we'll just get, we'll go to the front of the room this time. And then we'll go, oh, I agree with that, it would be biased if I went to you straight away. We'll go to the middle of the room, then I'll come to you. Yep.
Hello. I have worked, I'm a professor who is a filmmaker and also work with students in conservation environmental films. And I've noticed that recently, and I think this relates to the funding of many things, that they have been required to become better equipped in marketing and spend more time learning how to market themselves to hit a certain level than to just focus on the basic content of their work. And I think that's made it a lot more complicated because those who are better marketers tend to land it versus maybe those who are really better qualified to deliver. And my question to you is, this especially relates to, as several people have addressed, the issue of women, and that I have found in research that I'm doing on wildlife corridors now, that often it's driven by women who lived in the neighborhood, who happened to like it, and they're the ones who are getting this going, and yet they would be the least likely to be able to be qualified for funds, and yet over and over and over again, this is the source of so much that really happens. So I would like to know from the funders how to help my people who are applying and have really good quality, but may not be good marketers and other things, to best apply and be able to get the funds that, because they do make things happen. Thank you.
Great. Actually, I'm going to take two more. I'll just go to the middle here, and then we'll come to you, Greta. Yep. Oh, actually, someone's got a microphone at the back, so do you have that? And then I'm going to go, yes, to you here. Yep. Fire away.
Okay to go? All right, thank you. My name's Suzanne Asia-Stone, and I'm with the International Wildlife Coexistence Network, but had worked in the field for 30 some odd years now, and 20 of those years was with a very large national wildlife organization. And I left that largely because I was so distraught watching millions of dollars going to prop up organizations rather than going to the ground to actually make changes on the ground. And I have this, you know, we all do, this deep feeling of we don't have a lot of time to make the corrections out on the ground that need to be made. We're like on a train that is heading for a bridge that is out, and we need to change tracks. And the methods, the paradigms that we've used so far are not working. We have to change the model of how we are living on this planet. And so I'm very grateful that you're here. I'm also very cognizant of the dysfunction among NGOs, among the competitions, among the inability to work collaboratively. And I want to put my arms around them and just say, we are all in this together. How do we support each other? So I applaud you being here. And please prioritize the things that we need to change the track that we're on. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take two more, one here, yes, and then here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I really appreciate and applaud all those who are into funding and philanthropy. I think a bigger issue is how do we get our governments to fund conservation? And I feel that sometimes we close our mind to that part of funding, but it's really the most sustainable at the end of the day. And if we do not deliberately cultivate that, we are going to be discussing this issue for a long time. So my question is, my sort of comment, is you are in a special place to encourage organizations to tap the governments where they work by either making it a requirement or encouraging it, just like, you know, different quotas have been put in different grant requests. It can be done, but some of our governments, as long as someone else is working on it, they're not going to put money there. So we need to deliberately and intentionally ensure that we are trying to get our governments on board. Thanks.
Thank you. And one more question, and then we'll go to the panel. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. So my question is a little bit more systemic, and when looking at the systemic challenges of human-wildlife conflict and funding, considering the broader capitalist and consumer-driven economy, which essentially is unfortunately underpinned by a lot of social inequity and undermines long-term impact, if we're thinking long-term, essentially not the next 5 years, but the next 10, 20, 100 years, which is why we're here. We know that humans' needs clash with the way that nature's needs need to be funded, if you think about that. And it usually clashes with those that live closest to wildlife. As those on the other side, what do you think is the role of donors in challenging the status quo in terms of transforming how we think of our economy, consumerism driving natural destruction, and ultimately how we halt a deeply dysfunctional system where those who contribute the least to the problem are not only facing the brunt of the challenge, but then are often also expected to make the greatest sacrifices in spearheading solutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I can see all the people asking questions, you know, took up the challenge. We've had questions on the amount of funding that's actually getting to the ground to have an impact. We got the figure of 5%. We have the issue of, do we need to change our model? Are those who are marketing themselves best the ones that get the money, and those that are actually doing stuff, women in the field, not marketing themselves, they don't get the resources? How do we deal with competition amongst organisations? Can we get governments to start stepping up and funding? And in fact, the Global Biodiversity Framework anticipates that, but how do we do that? And then the final question, regretted this systemic question about inequity, the system. Are we ignoring the fundamental basis of the system around consumerism, and those who are least able to deal with it are feeling the brunt of it? So that's a wide array of questions, from very large scale to very specific. So who would like to kick off there? Yes, Megan.
I'll just tackle it all. No, I'm just kidding. Well, just a couple of things just sort of jumped out at me with the various questions, and I apologize if I'm not getting the right person who asked it. But, you know, as a relatively young organization, funder organization, you know, who is still very much on a learning journey, you know, this issue of trust-based philanthropy, for us, you know, we want to get there with our grantees, and part of, you know, that is developing these relationships, and that occurs over time. It occurs with, you know, you're lucky enough to go visit some of these field sites, but, you know, that's not necessarily always practicable. But having conversations with folks here, or, you know, I think to your point about those who are not great at marketing themselves, having equitable access to the resources that are out there. And I think Ganesh made a point earlier in your presentation about, you know, we're kind of biased towards well-written grants. There are roles, I think, for intermediary organizations and even funder collaboratives to play to help support the folks on the ground who need those resources to make those pitches, right? And I know a couple of different funder organizations that do that and work with that sort of capacity to supplement that. Likewise, sort of in the funder, I'll call it collaborative space, which not necessarily pooled funds, although that is also a great resource for learning from not only, you know, potential grantees out there, but also funder colleagues. There are opportunities to, like for instance, I did a wonderful, call it field trip to the Midwest in the US this year to meet with a bunch of tribal organizations and sort of get to hear what they're doing, because we're doing a lot with bison reintroduction right now and wanting to support some of those tribal groups and what they're doing, but they're not necessarily, we don't know who are those groups, because so much of this has been said when we're talking about human-wildlife conflict and coexistence is intersectional, right? So when we talk about bison, for instance, we're really talking about biocultural conservation. We're talking about cultural revitalization by bringing, you know, bison back to the landscape, but we're also talking about ecosystem resilience, you know, by bringing bison back to the North American landscape. But talking to the people to whom, you know, it's important ecologically, it's important from a food sovereignty, from a food security issue, from, you know, again, a cultural revitalization issue is critical, but we're not always in a place, nor do we have the capacity ourselves to sort of do the deep dive and understand, you know, across this suite of, you know, different tribal organizations and entities, like, who is doing what, who needs the resources, and we rely on funder colleagues and intermediaries often to help us build those relationships with the folks who are out there and help those folks make the best pitches for the work that they're doing and, you know, where the resources are most needed. So, you know, I think there's, in the funder community, I feel like there's, we need to exercise a lot of humility in terms of, you know, it's been said, just listening and hearing, but recognizing that, you know, it's easy to go to the same organizations that are well known or that can market themselves, but you do have to do a little bit of a deeper dive and dig and try to hear from those voices that don't always get the spotlight. And it's a challenge for all of us, I'd probably, you know, say, and especially when you're just starting. So, sorry, just to close the loop, for us personally, you know, we are on that learning journey and will continue to be, you know, for as long as we exist, and do have perhaps a heavier touch at the outset, you know, as we get to know folks, and, you know, as we get more comfortable with our, you know, the issues that we're working on, the grantee partners with whom we've worked, you know, that sort of, it becomes a spectrum. It's not either we do sort of trust-based philanthropy or we don't. It's about sort of building those relationships over time and recognizing that a lot of these issues are not, you know, one and done, but they're sort of long-haul relationships, so.
Great. Anyone else want to? Yep, Dan.
There's so many questions there. I'm still taking a little while to digest them all and to sort of frame a response that covers many of them. I mean, I certainly agree about the need to listen, and I mean, I think if there's the big takeaway from this conference, it's about the need to listen, about what the needs are on the ground, of the communities on the ground, those that are bearing the brunt of human-wildlife conflict, not what we think they need and what we're willing to sort of supply and think they will benefit from, but what they genuinely need, and ensure that it gets to them. I mean, we do support very local grassroots organisations in terms of the sort of the marketing side of thing. We're not looking for polished applications, but listening to what everyone has said, we do have to strike the balance. We have to report to our donors. They're expecting to see results, and impact is obviously key. But also we need stories. I mean, we need stories for our fundraising, and in many ways what would be better would be, a one-page application, and then a piece to camera talking about the work, and some good photos and images that we can use for our own fundraising. But yeah, we do have our responsibilities. We have our responsibilities to the Charity Commission, which are in the UK, which are getting increasingly rigorous and tight in their checks and balances, and rightly so. In answer to some of the questions about getting out to those and that we're just not reaching, I mean, one of the things I've been sort of keen to sort of see and look for, and I'd love to see Tusk doing more of, is supporting more initiatives in West and Central Africa. And I don't know if it's just the language barrier, and that we're not reaching francophone organisations, or there are other issues at play. But I think listening to what everyone else is, I think we owe it to ourselves to go on the front foot more and try and find those organisations, and make it easy for them to come to us for funding. And visiting is key, but obviously we have limited resources ourselves, so that's not always possible. And one thing I would like to flag is that for the past 10 years now, we've been running the Tusk Conservation Awards, which shines a spotlight on the unsung heroes of conservation. And year in, year out, we're keen to have as diverse a suite of nominations as we possibly can get. And again, we'd love to have more from West and Central Africa, and at any level where we have these unsung heroes of conservation that aren't getting the support and the acknowledgement that they deserve. There's for this year's awards, there's still one more week to go. The nominations close on the 6th of April. So yeah, do check that out if that's an option.
Great, thanks for that. I'm conscious of time, but yeah, we'll take two more. We'll take you, Stuart, and then Zhizhe. Yep.
Thanks. And try and respond to a couple of the questions. The first one was about the questions from the back about the 5% of, was it 5% of funding was delivering impact, or 5% of funding was getting to the ground? And there's sort of a bit of there's a challenge with that, because the ideal scenarios is that funding is going directly to those projects and there's little in the way of stopping it going straight to delivering the impact. How can we get the funding to increase? We want to increase the amount of funding that's delivering an increased impact, I think would be the ideal thing. And just thinking about the impact and how the donors can work together with the conservation community to help to increase that impact is by knowing what's working on the ground and how the solutions are being adapted to increase the effectability and the effectiveness. And coupled with that is what's the evidence that's being provided as a sort of two-way conversation. I went on to conservation evidence, if anybody's worked with the conservation evidence team, and looking at conflict, I think there's only 66 examples of papers out of 8,500 in conservation evidence related to conflict, and only 6 out of 8,500 related to coexistence. So understanding what's going to be working on the ground, how we can increase that effectiveness, and knowing who those people are on the ground who are delivering the work, which is one of our key challenges, and we rely on experts, we rely on different universities, different organisations to help us to pinpoint who those people are. So it's an ongoing challenge, but 5% seems awful. I mean, that's really, I'd love to see that study. The second question I want to ask, okay, about the influencing government, it's a really difficult one because governments respond and answer to the people of the countries, and as the little experience we're working within the donor community, we're always concerned and cautious of the power dynamics of a donor or foundation or organisation. And it's quite a top-down thing to do for a donor to then go and speak to the government about more funding being directed to conservation work, because that might not be responding to the demands and the needs of the people of the country. So it's a really, really difficult one, and super conscious of just that dynamic, the power dynamic, and the responsibilities and the expectations of donors, regardless of their size. It could be a massive donor, going and having those conversations somehow with the government, but it's a tricky one to address. And yeah, I wouldn't want to step into those shoes of that donor who's going to do that. But, if there's a way we can do it, big or small, then it'd be good to explore.
Zhishe and then Matthias.
Sure, just a few thoughts. I agree that 5% is absolutely abysmal, and I'm not sure what that number really is, but I think that's one of the driving force for the founders of WCN wanting to have 100% of the funds that were raised to go straight to the field. But the grand scheme of things, we're a relatively small donor, and so there are much larger donors out there, and so when you put it all together, about 5% would not surprise me. And I agree, Matthias, maybe some of it comes a lot from the red tape from government agencies and some of the larger donors. And that's one thing that we try to cut through, but at the same time, doing the due diligence, again, it goes to that issue of scale. There are some resources, so we are fortunate enough to have some visionary donors who invest in WCN itself that allow us to carry that 100% model, but there's going to be a limit to that, and that's why we need more organizations maybe that carry that. And we try to carry it through in some of our granting, but also gets complicated. So for smaller organizations, we'll take a different view because what's overhead and what's project costs are often very intertwined, but for larger organizations, I don't need to name them, but I'm sure many of you know them, we're much tougher on the overhead, and we'll tell them, well, you go to other donors, you're more core donors, you have the ability to raise that, you're based in New York or DC or wherever you are around the world, and you could do that. It's much harder for an organization based in Mozambique or in Colombia to do the same. To the point of trying to leverage government funding, I agree. Again, I think many of us here are relatively small donors, but some of the larger foundations, some of the larger donors, government donors might have that ability to leverage government influence. I think they should, actually, so I don't necessarily want to be in those shoes. And I think you've got to walk the line carefully with cultural sensitivities because we can't go and tell other people what to do. But I think money talks, and you can try to structure deals that create match funding in some way, that one thing triggers to another and another. forget all the other questions, but I want to get to Greta's question. It's really hard, so actually I don't have the answer, but I think it starts with basic conversation. And I think some of those conversations can be had with many people in this room. So when you have the trust of a donor, I think you can engage in those harder conversations and talk about the systemic change that's needed. And it's a longer term aspect, but I think it starts there. It starts not being afraid to engage individuals in those conversations that challenge one's personal behavior. And if it's a donor, and I've seen it with some of our conservationists engaging with their donors and being able to push the envelope a little bit because they are building on 10 years of trust, and you can have those hard conversations. Sadly, nowadays, I think hard conversations are getting harder and harder to have with each other, whether you live in the United States or in Ethiopia.
Yes, on the 5% thing, I think you have to take a very close look what's in and what's out. Because sometimes do you consider training courses for rangers as overheads, or is it project activity? Do you count village assemblies, meetings, as overheads or as project activities? So there's quite a bit of room for interpretation. You have to really have a close look and count the beans to know where you stand in terms of percentages. The other thing we discussed repeatedly, that there's good request writers and there's good implementers. There might be an overlap, but there's not a total match. So the question is how to deal with that issue. My question is, I don't know, just tossing it in the round, how much sense would it make to think about a certification, accreditation scheme, which somehow makes it easier for baseline agencies to submit requests? Would this make it easier? Would this make it even more complicated? But then maybe you can, once you have that seal of quality, if you can then still write a 2-pager, and that's enough. That might be possibly one way to think about. And on the big questions, which came as last point, the systemic ones, I think we should all closely ask ourselves, which networks do we have? Whom could we approach? Should we approach? Should we be more proactive in engaging with the right people? I think there was someone once said, well, if you count those 3 people, you have the Pope and the President of the United States. So check your networks and see what you can possibly do. Thank you.
Can I pipe in just real quick?
Yes.
I know we're at time, but I really do believe that we need to push our funders, and this is going to be unpopular because I'm pushing myself out of a job, but we should be giving more money, and our donors should be giving more money. I don't know if you're referring to the 5% that foundations give, like the max. Like, we have to unlock DAFs. Like, I talk about this all the time, but what we are doing is not enough, but it is not supposed to solve the problem. I believe that governments are supposed to solve the problem, and we are supposed to be a stopgap to that. And so I overspend every year, and I think we all should be overspending every year, and we should be pushing our boards to overspend every year, because the point is to get the money on the ground. Honestly, it's the point. Even if we don't have jobs, that's the point. To why women don't get funding? It's a great question. I don't know. I believe that women are doing great work. They should be funded. We all should be funding them. Not that we shouldn't be funding men as well, but women historically have not received funding. And so why don't we try to right that wrong for once? As far as systematic change, I know. I mean, I feel you. And I don't have the answer to the problem either, but I think we should all be having more conversations about that. But I do think that donors are people, and they get tired of getting pitched all the time, and they get tired of this. But our job is to get money on the ground, and so we should be pushing money out the door. And so I try to do it, and I think we all responsibly try to do that. But it is hard, and it's hard to get our trustees or our board to do that. But that's our job, is to push them, make them a little uncomfortable. We all should be a little uncomfortable. So that's it. Sorry, got a little ranty there.
No, really appreciate that, and here. I'm very conscious of the time. The original plan with Alexandra was that I try and summarise, but I don't think we've got time to do that. But I just do want to focus on one recurring theme, and that was the issue of trust and this trust-based philanthropy. And trust doesn't come through a document. Trust comes through forming relationships. And I think it was you, Ruth, and Rachel and others talked about being too far removed. If you're too far removed from the ground, it's very hard to build trust. It's very hard to understand it. And you made reference to, people who in Europe have one expectation of people in, say, Africa, but they don't practice the same themselves. Just in 1 week last year, when Malawi relocated 150 elephants from one place to the other, Norway killed one walrus that was sitting on someone's boat called Freya. And there's a lot of inconsistencies there in terms of hold the mirror up to yourself. But I do think this whole issue of trust-based philanthropy, from that flows the one-pager, from that flows ongoing funding, and from that flows getting the money to the right people in the field. And as you said, Rachel, as you build trust and you build impact, then governments can see that, and we have to get governments on board because it can't be sustained and it won't last over the longer term if it's just philanthropic funding coming through. I think we can all say that all of our donors here have an appetite for this. Some are learning, some are already there, some are prepared to think of new ways of doing things, but I think we've been grateful to have such an open conversation this afternoon. Thank you to all of our panellists here and sitting in the field, and also in the field, sitting in the audience, and all of those of you who were courageous enough to ask your questions. So thank you very much, and a big thank you to Alexandra for bringing us all together.